Opponent plays e4, and I'll play the Sicilian with c5. The pawn on the wing controls the central square. He plays c3, wanting d4. If I take, he'll recapture with pawn to control the center with pawns. And so I will immediately react in the center with the d5 push, because if he captures, the queen can recapture without being chased away by the usual knight on c3, since the pawn on c3 actually occupies the square. My opponent pushes e5. Here I'm going to develop my bishop before playing e6, but actually I think I'll first play knight to c6 to attack the pawn. You never know. If he plays knight to f3 to defend, I'll play bishop to g4 to pin, but as you can see, he pushed d4. Now I'm going to develop the bishop to f5. If he takes on c5, I could take the pawn on e5, so I'll play bishop to f5, and then play e6 so that the bishop on f8 defends the pawn on c5. In this position, the idea is to put as much pressure as possible on the pawn on d4. The knight attacks, soon the queen to b6 because he has a space advantage. The pawn on e5 is hindering my pieces. It blocks the development of my knight to f6 in particular, and it prevents my bishop from coming to d6. So I need to attack the structural base, the pawn on d4. My opponent plays bishop to d3, so I capture. The queen recaptures, so I don't think I'll take on d4 right away, because since I'm not able to win that pawn, if I capture immediately on d4, I free up the c3 square for his knight. First, I'll play queen to b6. I'll reinforce the attacks on d4, but also put initial pressure on b2. You see, he plays knight to a2, preparing kingside castling. He could have played knight to f3, but his idea after kingside castling is that the rook on f1 won't be blocked by the knight on f3, and that the rook can support the advance to f5. So what I'm going to play is the pawn to h5. It might be surprising, but my idea is to play knight to h6 and knight to f5 to block this square, to stop the advance of the f-pawn, and so that my knight can help intensify the attacks on the pawn on d4. But then why play h5? It's simply to prevent g4 from being able to drive out my knight. So my opponent plays a 3 now. Well, we'll play knight to h6 as planned. And I think he played a 3 in order to play b4. And relieve the bishop from protecting the pawn on b2 so that the bishop can move to the e3 square and defend d4. He does kingside castling, but he hasn't played b4, so now I'm looking to see if I can win the pawn. Capture on d4. He recaptures with the pawn, knight to f5. I attack once again, and if he plays bishop to e3, I could take the pawn on b2. Well, now we'll capture on d4. And you see, my knight didn't have the f6 square, but in the end, with this route, knight to h6 and knight to f5, it will allow me to attack his structural base. In a pawn structure, first try to attack the structural bases, the pawns that can no longer be defended by other pawns. So it's true that the pawn on c3 was defending the pawn on d4, but the exchange on d4 created this structural base. He plays knight c3 and the pawn falls. So here I look at knight takes d4. If he wants to attack my queen with knight to a4, I could play knight takes knight with double check, check from the knight, check to the queen, so he won't be able to take my queen. So I'm going to take on d4. If I play bishop to e3, I can first do knight takes knight check and then capture his bishop. He moves away. I'm also considering the move knight b3. That could be interesting. Knight b3, rook b1. I can take his bishop on the black square. Why not? Sometimes there are also combinations with this alignment of rook-king and the fact that my queen controls the j1 square. I've already seen ideas based on h4, knight g3 check, and after pawn takes, pawn recaptures with the rook attacking and mate possibilities. Because as soon as the king comes to g1, knight f3 with double check, and that leads to mate. So I'll capture the piece on the e2 square first. And then maybe I'll consider the possibilities of this pawn push to h4. But with his knight on e2, he's still watching over the square, meaning that if I play h4 and king g3, he won't recapture with the pawn, he'll recapture with the knight. And when I recapture with the pawn, he can recapture with the queen. So for now, it doesn't seem to be working well, so I'll just develop and play the bishop to a7. But I'll keep this idea in mind. If his knight moves at some point, maybe this idea could come into play. So my opponent plays b4. I'll place a rook on the file, on the open file. It can't hurt. this little move, rook c8, he plays f3, connecting his rooks, and I can very well play rd7. I'm not obliged to kingside castling. I can play rd7 to connect my rooks as well. I don't see any problem with my rd7. But anyway, if I play rook c1, the rooks will be exchanged on the c file, and I won't really be able to use that alignment on the h file anymore. So listen, I'll finally give up on the idea of the rook-king alignment, though a bit reluctantly, and I'll play kingside castling to connect my rooks. I have an extra pawn, so I don't need to put on a show. I just need to exchange the rooks on the file. So if I don't play rook c1, I'll play rook c4, I'll double the rooks, and I'll find ways to penetrate at some point. He plays knight to g3, he's attacking my knight, so I'll take on g3 once, then play g6 to block any pushes on f5. But be careful, there's a queen-king face-off, and that can always be dangerous. He plays f5, and here I can't take with the g-pawn, I can take with the e-pawn, and then he can play rook takes. But that's how I'm going to play it anyway. I'm also gaining the e6 square for my queen, and I think he'll play rook to f1. Note that if his queen no longer has the face-off, the rook could be taken. So if I play h4, he'll come to g4 to keep that face-off, but then I have rook to c4 to attack his queen. So he's going to bring his rook to f4, after which I could provoke some exchanges. Let's play it this way. I'm going to play h4 here. Try to deflect the queen from the face-off to try to take his rook afterwards. So he plays the queen to g4. That was expected. I can play queen to e6 to pin his rook, but then he can play rook to f1 to protect it. I play rook to c4 afterwards, and this time if I play rook to f4, I could do queen takes, and rook takes back to win a piece. But after queen e6, rook f1, rook c4, he might put that rook on f4. But I could take, I could exchange. So I'm going to play Qe6 here. I'm simply threatening to take the rook and bring the rook to c4. This will free up the kc8 for the other rook, and maybe at some point there will be possibilities for a back rank mate, even though the bishop is watching over kc1. He plays rook f4, so we're going to provoke exchanges here. I have one more extra pawn, so there is absolutely no reason not to exchange. And now we are going to start getting into his strategic position, maybe even provoke more exchanges. By the way, rook c4 and I win the square c8 with tempo. But be very careful, this is a game without any increment. So I only have 57 seconds left on the clock, and I am going to have to play with extreme speed now. I might have to reduce my commentary significantly, we will see. So he exchanges, I recapture, I'm going to play b5 to solidify, rook d8 after the rook on the file. So there you go, rook d8 on the file, I'm going to go for the square d3. My bishop isn't very well placed, I'll need to improve it, I play rook d3. If he comes to defend, maybe bishop g5, that will allow my bishop to come to f4 and improve its position. There you go, bishop on f4. I had some checks. I'm not sure what that leads to, but after bishop g3, it will threaten some mates. So I'm going to play a little bishop g3 check. I'll come here. I'll attack his pawn twice. I don't think he can defend it. Yes, he can still play rook d2. So he advances. He has slightly damaged my pawn structure, but I want a pawn, rook check. Next, I need to improve the position of my king. Fortunately, he can't give me any checks. My bishop is controlling. I'm going to come to e3 to try to check him on e4. It's not easy because his king is not easy to reach on the white square. Here, I don't have a bishop on a white square. I don't have a knight. I don't have a pawn to attack him. So it's not that easy to get to him. So he moves back here, rook e1. Maybe rook f1 check afterwards. If king e2, rook f2, and I can exchange the rooks, and then it will be easy to win if I manage to exchange the rooks. I'm not far from mating him, but I offer the exchange of the rooks here. I attack the pawn on g2, and afterwards there will be discovered attacks with the bishop. He takes, I take back, that's it. There are no more rooks on the board. He exchanges, and the pawn will go to queen. Now it's going to be easy to win in 20 seconds. It will be possible. And actually, he's not playing anymore. Maybe he realizes the obvious and he resigns. All right, new game. My opponent plays e4, and this time I'm going to play the French defense with e6. He plays d4. I had played the Sicilian defense. Now I'm playing the French defense. I play d5. He pushes, and finally I play c5. So even with a different opening, it still looks a lot like the first game. We have the same pawn structure, except that I haven't developed my bishop. That's the big difference. Now he plays the knight to f3, so I'll capture on d4 to weaken the protection of the d5 pawn, and now knight to c6. If he takes, I recapture, and that brings my pawn closer to central control. But he plays bishop to b5. So I play bishop d7, I unpin, and I threaten knight takes. He takes, recapture pawn, avoiding bishop to play c5, then c5, driving his knight. So the knight comes to f3, and now I have the bishop on the light square. He doesn't, so I need to find a way to play with this bishop on the light square. But for now, I don't really see any ideas. If I play bishop to b5 and simply play rook 1, maybe I'll need to put the bishop on c6 and manage to play d4 to open up the diagonal. Listen, for now, I'm mainly going to focus on developing the knight to e7, which could go to the square c6, f5, like in the previous game, or knight g6. But here, you see, there's bishop g5, which pins my knight. I'm still going to ask his bishop a little question. Does he want to help me develop? Bishop takes, bishop takes. That would be funny because it would be two bishops against two knights, but he refuses. So I play queen c7, I unpin myself and put pressure on the pawn. And now I'm threatening moves like knight c6, knight g6, knight f5. So he takes bishop, takes back. And we have two bishops against two knights. So he plays b3, and here he's weakening the dark squares. My dark squared bishop should be able to take advantage of that. But for now, I don't know how, especially since the knight is still on b1, but it's not going to stay on b1 forever. Still, the knight on b1 controls the squares c3 and a3. Here I'm simply going to the castle. That seems normal to me. He plays knight to d2, and now I need to think about what I'm going to do with my pair of bishops. I mustn't give him squares with his knights. That's the problem. You see, if I play d4, I give him the square e4, I give him the square c4. So I'm going to keep this alignment of pawn. But in any case, he's going to try to hit me with c4. And if I play d4, the square e4. So now what am I thinking about? There are two moves that come to mind. Either a small minority attack with a5 to try to play a4 and weaken his structure. And after a5, if I play a4, then later on the idea of c4, the counter thrust d4, will certainly give him the square on d4, but the pawn on b3 will be vulnerable on the attack file for my rooks, because precisely the pawn on a2 will have moved to a4. My other idea is to open up the position with f6, capture, bishop recaptures, and to have as much open space as possible for my bishops. And I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play f6. He takes, I take back. So already the black square bishop is active. That's what's interesting. It also prevents any development of the knight. My pawns also prevent it, but it's interesting to see how this black square bishop dominates this knight. Now I also need to find a role for this light square bishop. So he plays rook b1, and if I play a 5, it's the same. He'll still play a 4 against me. So here, of course, I'm looking at the e5 push. To play e4, free the light square bishop. Maybe after e5, actually play bishop g4, the pin. I tried to play e4. So if I play e5, he comes to hit my pawn structure with c4. I can play e4, attack his knight, which actually lacks squares. Well, he has the e1 square. But then my pawn is attacked, and if I push d4, I lose the e4 pawn here. You see, after e5, c4 bothers me. e4, knight e1, what do I do with this d5 pawn and this d4 pawn? Maybe bishop to f5, and if he takes on d5, the push e3, I attack his knight and I attack his rook. Maybe something like that, we'll see. e5, I mobilize my center pawn, and after e4, I'll try to have lots of good diagonals for my bishops. The position is interesting. You see the confrontation. Actually, I don't have an extra pawn. You can clearly see the pawn center and the pair of bishops against the pair of knights. So he plays c4. That was expected. So I push e4. The knight comes to e1. So I worsen the position of his knight. But that's what I was telling you earlier. As soon as he plays knight e1, I have a problem with my pawn on d5 because taking, I think, weakens my structure. He can recapture with the knight on c4, and the pawn on a4 is still quite vulnerable. And if I push d4, he can take on e4 and even attack my bishop on the dark square. That's why I was considering the move bishop e5. I can win the exchange, but I'm going to lose a lot of pawns because he'll take on d5. I push e3, he takes on e3. I take his rook. He recaptures with the knight or the queen. I'm not sure yet. So I traded my bishop and 2 pawns for his rook. It's not exactly a dream scenario. It's not a very interesting trade for me either. What happens after bishop d4 takes, I have double captures on f2 and the capture on h2 afterwards. This move bishop d4 could be interesting. Bishop d4. Then we take, do I have anything else after that? I even have this interesting push to e3. Because if bishop takes, check, and the king moves, his rook is hanging, but the knight defends it. But after bishop d4, then we take, rook takes, I actually have the push to e3. And if his rook moves, I'll push to e2 with check, and the pawn attacks the queen. That's what I'm going to do. Bishop d4. You see, it took me a while to find the right sequence, but this is a critical moment. That's why I spent so much time on it, because if I don't respond correctly at this critical moment, I could end up in a bad position, whereas I feel there's something decisive here. These pieces are really being held back. All the pieces are on the first rank. There's just a knight on the second. I have more space. I have a fairly offensive position with the center, the bishops, the queen, but I need to find a way to take advantage of it. So here, I take on f2. And now the push to e3, I'm attacking the rook. I'm ready to get my piece back, by the way, by taking the rook with check. But the idea is that if the rook moves, the push to e2 attacks his queen and reveals the face-off between the two. Afterwards, he can simply move his king. I take his rook. He plays, for example, the knight to f3, and he gets away with minimal loss. That's certainly the best way for him to play, especially since he has much more time. So if I were him, I would play king to h1 here. You have to give back the rook. My bishop on the white square isn't doing anything. It's true that right now the game is mainly focused on the black squares, but I wish my bishop on the white square could at least do something. And I don't see how. That's what worries me. On the other hand, I see that my rook and my queen can quickly join the fight. The bishop on the white square is pointing in the right direction, but there isn't really a concrete target. So he plays king to f1, and now he's going to allow me bishops b5 checks, and queens takes h2, and of course the capture of his rook. I'm going to take on h2, and the Lichess playing area is telling me that my opponent has left the game, and that I could claim victory in about 100 seconds. 1 minute and 30 seconds. So what I'll do is speed up this sequence in editing and go straight either to my opponent's return if he comes back to the playing area, or obviously to his resignation. But you can see the opponent isn't being very sportsmanlike, preventing us from seeing a nice finish simply because he's frustrated with how the game turned out. But here, it's true that in any case, I'm going to win back my piece, I'm going to win back my rook, and the attack is too strong. Between the queen, the pawn, the bishop, the other bishop that could come as soon as the knight moves, as soon as I take the rook, this rook can also get involved in the fight. There are too many attacks. His king has no shelter. All these pieces are on the first and second ranks, and you can see that my king isn't being attacked at all. So here it's obvious that I'm going to win the game. And so my opponent didn't come back to the game, so I'll be able to claim victory. He was a very sore loser. I have white, and I'm going to start with the pawn d4. The queen opening. My opponent plays pawn to d5, I play c4, the queen gambit, I'm trying to deflect his pawn out of the center, and he plays c5. Now this is interesting because it's the Tarrasch defense. This double lever is very explosive, of course. So here I think I'm going to exchange my pawn from the queen side for his central pawn. And so that's what I do. He's going to recapture with the queen. No, he plays e6. What kind of move is that? Normally, players recapture with the queen, after which we play knight to f3 to protect the pawn, and then we play knight to c3 to chase his queen. But here he plays the pawn to e6. I really don't know this at all, so he's giving me a pawn gambit to try to get better development. I'm going to take on e6 anyway, then I'll bring out my knight to f3. So he sacrificed a pawn to try to get better development, but I don't really see the impact of his development. Here, I'm going to recapture with the queen to provoke the exchange of queens. I have an extra pawn, so I'm going to do it. So of course, after the exchange of queens, he has a check on b4, but that check is easy to parry. And my knight attacks his bishop on a white square in an open position where the pair of bishops could be a major asset. He avoids the exchange of queens and is going to try to play king jack c6 to gain a tempo on my queen, and unfortunately I won't be able to counter that. And you see, it's still dangerous because after king jack c6 my queen moves, then the knight can access the b4 square under the protection of the bishop, threatening fork on c2. This position isn't so simple. So if I give a queen check, he might put his bishop on a7 to shelter himself. If I take the pawn on b7, he'll play bishop c6 and he'll have a lot of development, and then things will go very, very badly for me. So of course I'm looking at the obvious move e3 or e4. Otherwise I also have pawn g3, knight c6, queen d1, with the idea of playing bishop g2 and kingside castling and having the bishop on this diagonal. Why not? That could be interesting too. And that's what I'm going to do, by the way, g3. So there you go. He plays knight c6. I go back home. I don't try to be clever. I just play queen d1 calmly. He plays bishop c5. He's aiming at f2, so I play bishop g2 and now kingside castling. And he himself is going to kingside castling. So actually both sides have managed to develop. But I have one extra pawn. He's still a bit better developed than I am because he has all four of his minor pieces out, while I still have two at home. If I play bishop g5, he'll play h6, and I can't retreat because of g5. And after bishop g5, h6, bishop takes, queen takes, I'll be giving him the pair of bishops in an open position. Moreover, connecting his rooks like that isn't the right idea. So my bishop isn't easy to develop. Here, I'm even considering a 3 to prepare the move b4, attack his bishop, and place the bishop on b2. That's actually how I'm going to proceed. A 3, I'm going to have a double fianchetto, meaning both bishops on the two longest diagonals of the board. He plays king g4, attacking f2 twice, but I'm not afraid if he takes. For example, if I play b4, bishop takes, rook takes, knight takes, king takes, he'll trade two minor pieces for a rook and a pawn, but those are two minor pieces he was actively using, whereas my rook and pawn were not doing much. So I'm not afraid of that at all. I'm going to play b4. If he wants to exchange on f2, let him do it. In fact, he does exchange. So after queen b6 check, I have bishop e3, there's no problem. No, he plays queen c8. I don't know what his idea is. Probably to put the rook on d8 opposite my queen. All right, I'll put the bishop on b2 since now there's no longer any risk of getting checked along the diagonal. And on rook d8, I'll move my queen, maybe qc1, then qc3 to attack g7, provoking a weakening like f6. So he plays bishop to f5. We'll just develop simply knight d2. Both knights are connected, the bishops are on the longest diagonals, and all I have left is to activate my queen and my rook. My rook can end up on the c-file, and my queen, for example, from b3 or c3. He plays pawn f5, attacking my pawn b4 twice. I think I'm going to push to b5. The knight is lacking squares, you see? I'm controlling the Dutch squares well here, so he'll have to retreat. He plays knight to e7. All right, I'll play a small move like queen c1, offer the exchange of queens, look for the c3 square afterwards, and slide my rook over. He plays queen e6. Is he attacking anything? I don't see it. And now I'm thinking of playing queen c3. If he plays f6, maybe knight to d4 will bother him with some forks here. All right, qc3. So he plays f6, and now I can play knight to d4 and take his light-squared bishop, and I'm not going to deprive myself of doing it. He comes to pin me. I hadn't anticipated his pin. I can simply play e3 to unpin myself. Why not? I also have knight to c4. All right, I'll play e3. I'll just unpin myself here. He might play rook to c8, but I have some queen's checks to move aside. No, he prefers to retreat his bishop because now, after the checks, he can block with bishop to f7. And here I've been playing for a while, but I'm making moves without really having a plan, and that's what's bothering me a bit. So I'm still looking at knight to c4, but queen to c5 is annoying me, especially since he's going to play rook to c8 afterwards. But his queen is on a black square, and there's a knight on the 6th, the fork. All right, so let's play knight to c4. We'll play with the pair of knights after all. After all, the knights are strong for making forks, so you have to push them up a bit in the position so they can find squares for fork. Here you see both knights are controlling a huge number of squares. I don't have much time left in this game. That's the difficulty. He plays queen to c7. And here, maybe b6. We know that if he comes to c5, there's knight to e6. So maybe this push would be 6. Plus, it fixes the pawn on b7. All right, I'll play b6. It also gives the square b5 to the knight, which can sometimes be interesting. I'm taking all the space from him here. So he goes to c8. What can I do? I can play knight to d6, offer an exchange of queens in an endgame that's favorable for me, especially since the pawn on b7 will be very weak afterwards. So I think that's the best thing to do. And I don't have much time, so it simplifies the position. Note that the knight also controls the f7 square, so if I start giving checks along the diagonal when the bishop comes back, at least I'll be able to eliminate it. So at this point he comes here and he decides to attack my knight. So I can go ahead and take the pawn on b7. But I think I'm going to give him the check I mentioned earlier. I want to get rid of his bishop on the light square. He doesn't want to. He goes to h8. All right, let's take the pawn on b7. The bishop protects, and the knight can attack the pawn if there are moves like rook b8. On moves like bishop f7, which attacks my queen, queen b5 protected by my knight, I can still offer the exchange of the queens. And for now, he doesn't want to exchange pieces because he's behind in material and because he sees that I'm low on time, so he's trying to keep as many pieces as possible to make me crack. Now I need to make my moves more rapidly and aim to simplify the position by actively forcing exchanges. And usually I know how to do that, so we'll see if I can manage it in this game. So he plays queen g4. Does he have any threats? I don't see any. I'm going to come to d6. I attack his bishop and I attack his rook. And by the way, I free the pawn. If his knight moves, I have moves like queen f5 to try to calm things down and offer the exchange of queens. Actually, I don't know. His queen might be missing 2 squares. Where is his h3 going? So here he's threatening to come into d2, but I have my queen and my knight. So I'm going to play h3 because the queen also has to ensure the protection of the bishop here. And if he retreats to g6, I can play g4. He might sacrifice, but I don't think it's very interesting for him to sacrifice. Listen, I'm going to play knight e6 for knight f4, but he's going to come into c2 with his queen. I'll play knight to f5. His knight takes, queen takes, 18 seconds left. Oh man, I thought too much about the position. I feel like I'm thinking far too much time about the position. I really need to start playing much more quickly now. Come on now. I am definitely going to take that item right away for myself. I'm going to play queen there, offer the exchanges. He comes here, I'm going to put the rook on the file. And then I should have played g4, I think. I'm going to play it. But I wanted to keep an eye on the c2 square. Well, the knight was watching it, so I didn't need to watch it with my rook. Well, after that, it threatens rooks to c8. All right, g4. All right, let's take a look at this. Let's play rook c8, try to force the exchange of rooks. Then maybe b7. All right, I take with check. I'm giving check. The pawn advances. This is going to be close. Now then, let's go ahead and get everything ready for the brand new queen. I've made the new queen, and now I'm preparing the check here. There we go, and I've got mate. That was really close. This game was really close. There were definitely some emotions. So it's true that games without added time make it harder for me to really set up my play on the board to build up, but it makes for livelier games with a bit more suspense. Well, there you go. You can leave me likes, comments, share the video, support the channel, and we'll meet again soon for new adventures on the chessboard. Goodbye, everyone.